This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first in our JM Career Planning Process webinar. My name is Michelle Valteau, and I am here with Rebecca Purdom.
Hello.
And we see that we've got several participants here, so we're going to go ahead and get started.
We should let you folks know as we get started that there is an opportunity to ask us questions as we go along. There's a question tab on your screen. When you type in a question, we will see what you've typed in and we'll endeavor to answer those questions as we go. So you should go ahead and answer questions. Anything we don't get to immediately, we'll make sure that we get to in the end. And anything for some reason we don't get to during the webinar, we'll make sure to send you an answer afterwards.
Excellent.
Maybe we should get started by just introducing ourselves. Why are you here?
Yes. So I am here because I met you all very briefly during our orientation session, and I am the Career Center's advisor that is assigned to this particular cohort. And I'm very excited to have this series of webinars as part of our overall strategy in working with you. How about you, Rebecca? Why are you here?
Why am I here? I'm here actually more as a handoff. I worked with this cohort of students during the orientation process, and we talked a little bit about the JM degree as a degree, how it's developing in the marketplace. It's a relatively new field. We'll be talking in this meeting, in this webinar, about how they can use that kind of new degree and that new thing going forward. So this is the transition point between what they did during orientation and the residency and working with career services in the future.
Wonderful. Well, it's an excellent setup. So we will go ahead and get started into the content of this webinar. So we wanted to start today by talking a little bit about the Career Center's approach for working with you. We really view our work together as a counseling-based approach instead of a placement-based approach.
Let's unpack that a little bit because I'm curious about that. What's a placement office? Because that is different than what you do here at Emory Law.
It definitely is. So a placement office generally provides one-size-fits-all assistance. So we're looking at your materials and plugging you into job opportunities. And our work together is going to be structured differently from that. We really view the counseling approach as more effective because it is a collaborative partnership. So I will be working with you throughout this process and we'll work together to discern your path, whether your path is going to be moving up in your current industry or position, or whether your path is actually going to take you and pivot you out of your current industry and position.
So a placement office is a place where you walk in with your resume and they say, here are 6 jobs and you can plug into. A counseling office talks about what you're going to do over the course of your career. And for folks who are in the middle of your career, that's particularly important. Why is the counseling approach important for folks right now in a program like this?
Absolutely. The counseling approach is important because part of what we want to do is to give you tools that you're going to be able to use throughout your career. So not just in this particular moment, but also going forward in the future.
And also the JM isn't a standard degree. There's not 15 jobs on a bulletin board that says we want a JM, right?
Correct. So part of what we're going to do through our counseling approach is help you to be able to communicate the value of this degree to future employers.
And particularly for folks in the middle of their career.
Yes.
We talk about mid-career a lot, and there's a reason we have this slide. When I was coming right out of my first degree, I had a resume that had my degree on it, my grades, my summer jobs, an internship, and my volunteer activities. What is it different for someone who's in the middle of their career to be thinking about working with a career guidance or a career coach? What's different about that?
Yeah, there are a lot of substantive differences. The main one being the wealth of experience that you bring to the table. You're someone who this is not going to be your first job search. You are not trying to cobble together unrelated experiences to make them look more substantive. You've got a lot of substantive experience, and we recognize that and we want to build on that. One of the other things that we're cognizant of is the fact that you have lots of obligations. So not just are you in an additional degree program, but you're working full-time, family obligations as well. So we really want to package the information in a way that's easily accessible.
What's different though? I mean, it sounds like a job search at this stage is a different thing. That I do have different skills before. Don't I just list all of the great things I've done?
That is, we don't recommend just listing all of the great things that you've done, because you want to be able to communicate in a more targeted manner. And the approach that we've laid out is developed based on the industry's best practices and standards. And that's how we're going to conduct this particular journey.
Okay. Are we going to talk more about that going forward?
Yes, we will be talking more about that throughout the slides.
Awesome. Let's go.
So this slide is just an overview of how we are going to move throughout the information that we have to share with you through the webinar series. This is timely for where you are in the program right now.
So each one of these webinars, when do these occur?
These are all going to occur during the intersessions of your class periods.
So this week, between your first class and your second class every semester.
Correct.
So in 5 semesters, there's 5 webinars that kind of drop in that middle spot.
Exactly. And we want to use that time wisely. It's an opportunity for you to refocus, and there will be some assignments involved with each webinar. So we want to give you that break to be able to absorb that information.
And why this particular progression?
So this particular progression makes a lot of sense because at each moment we're going to be building on what we have shown you in the prior webinar. So let's start out with the next webinar, which is going to be StrengthsFinder. This is going to be our self-assessment that we'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute, but we want you to take those results into consideration as you move through. We'll lead directly from there into our resumes and portfolios, which focuses on the foundational and substantive documents that you use in your search. And from there, we'll move on to networking, interviews, and social media in order to incorporate what you've learned about your strengths and what you've done with your resume into your LinkedIn profile. And the capstone piece is negotiation, interviews, and next steps. So this webinar focuses on basic tactics in negotiation and interviewing. And the final aspect of that is going to be the one-on-one meetings.
So this really is targeted at where folks are not only kind of perhaps in their career, but also where they are in the program. These are particular steps of kind of about where you are about halfway in the program. We target you in.
Exactly. So to dive a little bit deeper into the self-assessment piece, we want to talk to you basically about why we think it's important to really consider self-assessment. Self-assessment allows us to answer questions like, how well do you know yourself? And it does this through gathering data about your work-related values, interests, personality type, and aptitudes. People find that the better they understand themselves, the more likely they are to be engaged and productive in the workplace.
But this isn't squishy, fuzzy, warm stuff. You're not asking me to look deep into my soul when I'm thinking about my job search, right?
No, what we want to teach you to do is use what you've learned about your strengths to communicate your value to potential employers.
This seems like a shift. I remember when I was coming out of college, when I would take these assessments, they would figure out what I was good at, and then they would figure out what I was bad at, and then tell me to work on the stuff I was bad at, and take more classes in the stuff I was bad at, and you know, work at it pretty hard. This seems different. Has there been a shift in the industry?
There absolutely has. And instead of focusing on the negative, we want to focus on the positive, because we find that when people's talents and skills and knowledge and experience are aligned with their actual job duties, they tend to be more successful. And that's something we want you to keep in mind as you consider which direction this is going to take you. One of the other powerful things about this tool is that it gives you the vocabulary you need to be able to speak about your strengths to potential employers.
So instead of saying I know I'm good with numbers, it actually helps me couch the things I've done in the past to help me communicate that into the language that somebody in a hiring office might want to hear.
Exactly.
And what is it about being mid-career that we need to think about strength finders in a different way? This sounds like something that would have been hard for me to do at 25.
It definitely would have been hard for you to do. And in addition to that, your results might have been different. So a huge part of what StrengthsFinders focuses on are your actual experiences and how they inform who you are in the workplace today and what value you can bring.
Can you give me a couple of examples? What are the kinds of values that people might not understand that they have at MidCareer?
Certainly the perspective aspect. We work in a multi-generational environments in almost all industries these days. So having seen yourself at 25 and working with someone who is 25 is very different as well. And while you're managing working with someone who's 25, you may also be managing working with someone who's 20 years older than you. So these are some of the things that they can help, that the test can help us identify about ourselves.
And does it tell us to hide all of our weaknesses? Is that part of the goal of these tests, is to be good at what we're good at and pretend we're not, pretend those other things don't exist?
No, certainly not. It really is just to provide you with more information to help you really be self-guided in how you're communicating about what value you can add, but also in the choices that you make based on where you are.
So this is a testing tool. Students will actually take kind of a self-assessment and get a result.
You absolutely will. And you will receive a customized result from the StrengthsFinder organization. And we'll be following up with you a little bit later to provide you the information for how to access the tool.
Okay. What happens after students kind of explore the StrengthsFinders, figure out their strengths? What's the next step?
Well, the next step is to incorporate those strengths into the foundational documents that most people use when expressing who they are on paper to employers. So we'll move straight from that into focusing on resumes and portfolios, which are actually the nitty-gritty, the beef, and one of my favorite things about what we do together. So I am very fortunate to have 8 years of resume reviewing experience. And that's what I'm going to bring to bear on this conversation.
So you've seen good ones and you've seen bad ones.
I've seen them all. The one on this page, for example.
That's a real resume?
It is a real resume. Certainly not one that I've received, but we're going to take you from this. We understand that in many cases, you may not have updated your resume recently. I'll tell you a little secret. It's the cobbler's children never have shoes. I'm always looking at my resume going, I've got to update this. Oh. So thankfully, I'm here to do that for you. And so one of the first things I'll do is provide you just with some templates, because one of the scariest statistics that I hear is the fact that on average, people spend about 6 seconds reading a resume.
Literally, that's not reading, that's glancing. I mean, if 3 or 4 words catches their eye, you're lucky at 6 seconds.
Exactly. So one of the main things to focus on is making sure that your resume is visually appealing, well organized, and extremely easy to navigate.
And that's not just people. There's also now these computer systems. Sometimes you might upload your resume and there's some algorithm that's sorting resumes. So you also need to be able to speak to those resumes or to those algorithms as well.
Absolutely. So many employers use keyword searches when they are using these kinds of automated review systems. And so it's so important that some of the keywords that are in the job description actually appear throughout your resume, just to make it through the initial cut to get to the 6-second reviewer.
Oh, good Lord. So this is an art. This is not resume writing that I did 15 years ago, where it was about a deeply narrative description that I was trying to charm someone with my 3 to 5 page essay. This is a very different beast.
It's a very different beast, and now is the perfect time and moment for you to be reevaluating your resumes. You have a new degree program that we want to add into your resumes, but also the new degree program is designed to help you decide which direction you want to go, up or pivot. So we need to reevaluate who your resume is targeting and how.
I want to unpack that a little bit, because that sounds important to me. Very often with mid-career professionals who go back to get a degree, which is this cohort in particular, there's really kind of 2 motivating factors, and they may belong to the same person. Sometimes folks have been doing one thing for a long time and they want to change. Boy, that was a great job that I took from 25 to 35, and I want to go do something else. And the degree is an opportunity to reset and do something new. You also, that's the pivot, but you also have folks who've been in the same job, love their industry, love their employer, but want to be able to rise up. Mm-hmm. Are those different resumes? Are those different approaches in the way that you put together your portfolio materials?
Yes, they definitely are, because part of what you want to communicate is value across the board. So if you are moving into a different area or different industries, there are going to be different words that you will use to appeal to those folks than the ones that you're appealing to in the industry that you already know so well. One of the other things, though, is that the resume isn't the only way to do that. one of the ways to go into more detail is the dreaded cover letter.
Oh, I shudder as you say this.
Yeah.
Tell us about the cover letter, because I think that's terrifying for most folks.
I think it is. So at least you know you're not alone in that realm. But the fact is that not everything you want to communicate can be communicated in the resume. And so what a cover letter does, and what we want the best cover letters to do, is explain the intent behind the facts that someone is seeing on your resume, or to frame those facts in the way that's most favorable for the new opportunities you're targeting.
So if I'm trying to tell a story, the cover letter is the place to tell the story.
Exactly.
But that can be a purely nuanced story.
It absolutely can.
And what if I'm the person who might want to jump industries or might want a promotion inside? I mean, I said that these are not necessarily mutually exclusive goals for someone who is thinking about their next move. How do you do this? Is it 2 different resumes and 2 different portfolios and 2 different approaches for those 2 different paths?
Yes, in many cases it is. And so what we're going to do is make sure that you have both of those kinds of materials lined up and ready to go for whichever opportunity presents itself.
You also talk about portfolios. So there's resumes, there's cover letters. What other kinds of things should people, and keep in mind, Intersession 3, Webinar 3 comes about halfway through the program when folks have taken most of their core classes and they're starting into their specialties or into their electives. What are the kinds of materials that you're hoping folks will generate during this kind of period of career counseling?
There may also be writing samples, things along those lines. So if there are promotional materials that you've helped draft for folks, anything in increasing your online presence as well. So it really, we use the word portfolio because it really can be a number of different things, even transcripts. There are many pieces to this puzzle.
So things I've written or projects I've been part of can be part of something. I mean, it doesn't just have to be class papers. It can be things that have happened in my previous experience that shows that I'm a good writer, I'm a good project manager, I'm a good budget manager.
Exactly. Throughout your career, you may even need to update the references that you have through this program. You may end up working with a professor who is able to speak about you in a way that really communicates some of your values. So those, taking a reevaluation, another look at the whole portfolio is what we're going to do.
And looking at those references in particular, who I ask to give me a reference if I'm going to go up inside my company may be very different than who I'm going to ask for a reference if I'm trying to jump industries, for example. Beyond professors, it's a time to kind of evaluate kind of the entire way you present yourself into the institution, into different institutions.
Absolutely. And that leads us very nicely into looking at your network. So networking and social media are going to be the focus of our 4th webinar.
So when you say networking, here's the image I get in my head. Cocktail party, hotel, conference, ballroom, cheap drinks, bunch of business cards in my pocket, floppy name tag.
Yes, you didn't mention sweaty palms.
Sweaty palms. Yeah. I forgot the sweaty palms.
And awkward conversations.
Awkward conversations and like the 3 lines you've been taught to start. So what brings you here?
Yes, exactly. Those are, I feel like those are the typical networking nightmares, and that's well timed for Halloween. I mean, this is something that it sounds not very pleasant, and who has time to do something not very pleasant?
Well, I know that those moments can be valuable and important, but when you say networking, you don't just mean the mixer. You mean something very, very broad and much more robust, I think.
Yes, I certainly do, and hopefully much more pleasant. So a lot of the networking techniques that we are going to talk about in that particular webinar are focused on targeting. So we're thinking more about one-on-one meetings. We're thinking more about doing more research into who our ideal audience is. And that's generally going to be the focus, teaching you how to use tools to do that. In addition to that, you're at a point where you've joined the Emory community. So there are going to be thousands of other people, new folks in your network that we really want you to take advantage of. In addition to that, being a mid-career professional, you're in a position to actually engage in substantive networking on a daily basis in your current job. But we also want to just extend beyond that to see how other contacts might be leveraged. So we'll talk about some of the industry's best tools.
What are the kinds of things that you're supposed to do there? I mean, am I supposed to literally call up someone blind off of the Emory Alumni Network and say, hi, I want to talk to you. I happen to be an Emory student as well.
That is one approach. What we would recommend is having done a little bit more research before you make the cold call. And so we're very fortunate in this day and age to have technologies like LinkedIn that really allow us to do that and to have a sense of who is out there that we may want to talk to and how and what path they've been on. So generally, if we go to an organization's website, we can see what role they're in now, but LinkedIn allows us to see exactly how they got there.
So here's a question for you. This is my nightmare with LinkedIn. We just talked about the fact that if I want to pivot my career, I might have one resume that uses one set of keywords. And if I want to go up in the world, up in my industry, there's a whole different set of keywords and a whole different way I would present myself. One of the things that's tough about LinkedIn is it's a single resume, it's a single page. I don't get 3 LinkedIn profiles. So how do you use LinkedIn successfully in this kind of networking space when you may have multiple objectives?
I think you're making a very important point in that LinkedIn as a platform at the outset can seem very overwhelming. However, there are some very standard tricks to the trade to really maximizing this tool. And so for this webinar, I'm going to bring in my colleague, Greg, who is a consultant and who has spent years helping people maximize their online presence through social media. And so his platforms of specialty are LinkedIn and Facebook. And he is also a professional who has changed careers a number of times, was a law firm partner, is now a career counselor. So he really does understand the different pivots that you have to take and how you want to present yourself throughout those changes.
And in this, I mean, I think some folks think Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I don't do social media. I don't want to do social media. I am a good professional doing just what I do. I shouldn't have to play these games, these kids' games to get my next gig. Are you going to disabuse me of that?
I am.
Okay.
I'll just tell you right now, so you know in advance, I certainly am. These are the kinds of tools that are so important because guess what's online when you're sleeping, when you're in meetings, when you're doing whatever else it is that you have to do? Your entire resume and professional profile through LinkedIn. So we're not at a place in time where we can afford to ignore these kinds of resources. Instead of doing that, we're going to hold your hand so that you can use them successfully and so that you potentially are a person who ends up being known as an expert in your circles. And that certainly can't help wherever you want to go in your job search.
And that being known as an expert in your circle, even if your circle is small or your expertise is unique, these days that is done in this interlocked space.
Absolutely. And in many ways, this space makes it so much easier to do than in the past. We don't have to go through a process of submitting articles to different publications and months of editing, so on and so forth. We can find something interesting, make comments about it, post it and broadcast it to our entire network, and there we go.
And we talked about networking in the past. The other thing LinkedIn, of course, does is it allows folks to look at your resume and to see what you're up to and to be part of your process. Even if they don't know you very well, and they can reach out to you, or you can look at it and reach out to them. When we talked about contacting the Emory alumni, this is a way that you can actually know something about them and have an initial encounter that doesn't require you to drive all the way to their office and knock on their door.
Absolutely. So in this day and age, people are using the technology more and more to actually have those interactions. And I think that can save you a lot of time.
I see that we had one person raise their hand. If you can type your questions into the question box, we will tackle them as the questions come in. And we're happy to take those on.
So the final in our webinar series is going to focus on negotiation, interviews, and next steps.
And that's an interesting order. We talk about negotiations first. Why are the negotiation conversations? It used to be you interviewed, you got the job offer, you celebrated, you had a drink, you said yes, and you went in. Why has the negotiation really taken the spotlight these days?
So the negotiation is important in particular for this group because many of you may not be interviewing. Many of you are going to remain going along the lines in your current industry with your current organization. And so really leveraging your new skills and communicating the new value that you bring is going to be the important part.
And there's things going on in the negotiation space as well that I think we need to be informed of. There's good research these days about what might be happening in a negotiation that I might not know about when I'm there.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes, exactly. So there's plenty of information out there that's available to talk about different negotiation styles so that you'll be able to enter into those kinds of conversations feeling prepared.
And not some of the traps that I think some folks have done. I know there's more than anecdotal evidence. I think there's significant research about women often not negotiating, particularly successfully negotiating against themselves because of particular gender stereotypes or even linguistic types. Is that the kind of thing that we'll talk about?
Exactly. We'll go into that level of detail.
Great. What about interviews?
So interviews, I think, are another case where people often have a lot of anxiety, and we're going to focus on preparing you so that you really understand the questions behind the questions. So interview questions are not always what they appear to be and seem on paper. There's often a deeper story that they're getting at. And in this day and age, people are using a wider variety of interviewing techniques to get at your core values and strengths.
And when I go into an interview, I don't know how to ask this. Can I practice? Are there ways that I can get prepared for it using Emory services?
There absolutely are ways that you can get prepared for it. So one of the services that I'll be offering is mock interviewing, where we can go through a example employer and talk through exactly what we anticipate that would happen. And that practice generally does help people feel more confident so that they are less reactive to questions in interviews, so that they're able to actually steer the conversation to their strengths.
So when someone asks me, what's your biggest weakness? I can say I'm really organized and I like showing up on time. Not to be glib, but I mean, in some ways to anticipate those things so you're not set back on your heels.
Exactly, so that you're not caught off guard. You're going to be prepared and you're going to be guiding this as much as you possibly can.
We actually have a question from somebody about that right now. One of the questions that I think sometimes comes up, nope, that's not it. Why don't you close that? Sorry, folks, we're still learning our technology. But we do have a question I can see on the screen, on our screen, about someone says that in interviews, there are some things in their past career they're not particularly proud of. Can they undo those, or how do they answer that in an interview space?
There are plenty of ways to do that. You can, one, minimize those kinds of things. And one of the things we'll work on is minimizing something like that on a resume so that it doesn't necessarily come up in an interview. But in addition to that, we're going to teach you how to frame those challenges so that an employer sees that you have learned something from that, and what you have learned is what stays with you.
So I was let go from a previous job because I talked too loud on the phone. Nowadays, I don't talk so loud on the phone. That was a terrible example, but some mechanism to actually say that, wow, that was a great learning experience for me. My behavior has changed because of it. Thank goodness I had that previous experience because it makes them more valuable now.
Exactly. That's the perfect structure of an interview answer.
Okay. Another question we got from someone, they say that they have previous degrees prior to this program, and they're trying to figure out how to explain like this odd educational path, that they did something that seems very different than what they did later, and they don't want to look like I'm extrapolating a little bit, but they don't want to look like they were hopping all over the place. How do you explain kind of a wandering academic path?
I think a big part of explaining that is the format that you choose. So you want to not only reflect that on your resume, but also to explain that throughout a cover letter, and then the interview where you're one-on-one and can really talk about the narrative path. That is going to be the best way to address that kind of thing. And people do it all the time. You just need to be in the position to guide an employer through the decisions that you made. We're talking about wanting to really frame most of your path as being intentional.
Okay, so I did this on purpose, and even if this was a misstep, I changed direction or made another choice.
Exactly. I've recovered.
And same thing, I think, in the from what I can tell, same thing that happens in the career generally. I had this job for 2 years and that job for 2 years and that other job for 2 years. I guess that's not the problem it was in our parents' generation, where you were supposed to work somewhere for 30 years. So if you had a whole bunch of 2-year hops, you were in trouble. But how do you talk about that?
Talking about moving around, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that in this day and age, we do see a lot more movement. So that's not necessarily going to be as alarming as it would have been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can frame that as really more reflecting, instead of the organization, the skills that you were acquiring throughout your tenure there, that is a much better way to tell your story. And how maybe after 2 years at one organization, you had acquired everything you could get from that role and were ready to move forward.
Gotcha. One final question that I don't know that is specific to this, but it's worth just kind of talking about, is the JM is a new degree. It's not an MBA. It's not something people know very well. So maybe a short answer and then a longer question, how do we talk about it in a negotiation and an interview? And more broadly, kind of how is this program, this series of Career Center webinars going to help me think about how to talk about the JM?
I think that is one of the exciting challenges about a new degree, right? So we're spending a lot of time, you probably hear me saying the phrase again and again, communicating the value. That's because that is a lot of what you're going to be doing in your conversations with current or potential employers. Mm-hmm. So this is an education process for them, but you're the teacher. And we're going to empower you to be the excellent professor about this particular degree. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have taken into consideration when planning the progression. So the next webinar, which is the StrengthsFinder, mm-hmm. we're going to start at the granular level of the vocabulary that you use to communicate your intrinsic value. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to move that forward in refinement and sophistication to what is actually stated on your resume mm-hmm. about your value, bringing that forward to how you communicate your value in the networking sphere, mm-hmm. and then finally into those negotiations where you are live teaching people about your degree.
I know Lynn Labuda talks a lot about the need to tell your JM story, to be able to make sure that you can tell kind of the story of this degree, how you came to it, what you got from it, and how you're moving forward. And that really is what you're talking about, is Lynn's how you tell your JM story arc.
That's exactly what we're talking about. And we are probably going to host a mini session about that, focusing on that particular topic prior to the next webinar.
Great. So we have 5 webinars. We have this one that's the overview. We have one talking about how to self-assess and kind of describe our strengths, particularly as the professional we are right now, which is a different person than we were before. We get all of our materials together. We figure out how to network in this new tricky age. We then figure out how to actually have the live kind of sealing the deal moment. And then what happens?
That's going to be something that we cover in our final one-on-one sessions. So what does happen next is going to be different for each person. So we're going to work individually on how to approach what happens next, because that's something that's tailored to you. Mm-hmm. And I'm most excited about those sessions.
Now, if I get to, these are set for the Intersession. So webinar 5 comes toward the end of the degree. If halfway through a job comes up, really ready to make a move, do I have to follow these 5 steps before I'm allowed to talk to you on a one-on-one session?
Yes. No, just kidding. Just kidding. In fact, I really hope that is not what happens. If something comes up prior to a time that we have a webinar scheduled that focuses on it, please do reach out to me. My services are available to you at any time. I am having trouble getting our technology to move to the next slide. Thank you. Perfect. There we go. So the link that appears on the screen right now is one that I'll be sending you via email, but I love to use Calendly in scheduling. And I'm also happy to conduct appointments in person, but if in person does not work for you, which it won't for many of you, I always am happy to conduct appointments over the phone and even using Skype so we can have a face-to-face moment as well.
One of the reasons to set up this particular 5 webinar series in this particular order is because there's some evidence that this is actually going to fit most of the folks in this program, right?
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons that we're very excited about having this format, because it does incorporate the best practices and also uses where you are right now to guide us.
And those are the particular steps, but not, if it works for 80%, there's 20% it's not going to work for. So
that's when, if things are a little bit out of course for you, when you will reach out to me and we'll have a sidebar conversation about what's going on and how I can help.
Can you describe a little bit about the kinds of help you can provide for folks if they call you? What are the services that are available? Are you going to call the potential employer and set up the interview for them?
So unfortunately, I will not be calling all of your employers. I'm going to let you make the best impression on your employers. But what our work together is going to focus on is really strategizing what makes sense for you based on what you're faced with. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this really is a collaborative partnership, and how we strategize is going to vary greatly based on your individual situation. I can help you with a wide variety of things. So just having conversations about what I've observed in the industry and in the hiring market generally. We can also talk about maximizing some of what you learn about yourself from the StrengthsFinder assessment. We will, of course, talk about getting your actual materials in the best, well-organized order that they can be. But really, yeah, so focusing on your strategy as you're approaching different kinds of things.
And that's really, I think, the link between kind of what we talked about in orientation of what's happening in the industry, because I think it's important to understand when a new degree emerges, the context in which it emerges, how it might be received by some and not others. I always like to make, and I know we have medical professionals who cringe a little bit when I make this analogy, but it's not unlike the physician's assistants popping up 20 years ago in the medical profession. And some folks thought, who the heck are these people? How, do they think they're doctors? What the heck? And other people were thrilled to see them arrive. So being able to understand that context becomes very important, even if you're really in individual conversations. And that bridge strikes me as a challenging one, particularly right now in the industry that these folks are working in.
I think it is a challenging one. However, I think that this industry is at a point where cost consciousness is at an all-time high. So how legal services are delivered is changing because clients are no longer willing to pay attorneys the rates that they had in the past to do the kind of work that they did in the past. And so these kinds of degrees and corollary roles are ones that allow someone to add some legal value and perspective without incurring the skyrocketing, $1,000 an hour billing fees. And really, some of those things can be as simple and basic as knowing when to flag something as a legal issue. Right. Being a person in that conversation who is not viewed as being entirely in the realm of the lawyers, right? Being someone who's got an eye towards the business as well, but who is readily checking for issues that are going to arise across the board can really add a lot of value.
And being able to articulate that, particularly to folks who may have, there's the folks who don't want to hire the expensive lawyer and are happy to see someone who can, like you said, flag issues or manage compliance, for example. But there's also the folks who never thought about the things they might be tracking themselves into dangerous legal waters and didn't know it. And so there is this interesting pivot point that is both global for our industry, which is kind of the conversation that I had with students, but becomes a very different particular conversation when you're talking to individuals and they're talking about their career paths.
Absolutely. I think it's an exciting time to be pursuing a degree like this because of the high level of change that's going on. So I think in the legal realm, this kind of change was going to happen whether or not there were people who were specifically trained to become resources in this arena. So the fact that you all are enrolled in a degree program that's going to allow you to do that, I think is you are taking advantage of a great moment that we may not see this level of change again in this arena.
Great. We're on our last slide, I think, and so this was a chance for folks to ask final questions. We had a couple. I'm not sure the question tool is working for everybody, so if it's not, we apologize. But if it's working for you, please shoot us a question, and we'll take this last couple of minutes to see if anybody has anything else to add. Meanwhile, Michelle, next webinar.
Yes, the next webinar. So we'll have the opportunity to meet again in this format on March 1st, which is another Thursday during this exact same time slot. So 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we will be following up with details just in probably the next few weeks, actually, about accessing the StrengthsFinder resource and the self-assessment itself. Those will follow via email. And then again, just a quick plug for my Calendly link. If you would like to get on my calendar, please utilize that, and we can set it up to have our conversation in whichever format works best for you.
And just to clarify for folks, the email will go out with the ability to access the StrengthsFinder survey. The goal is for folks to take it before the March 1 deadline, because you're going to actually talk about not taking it, but actually how to read results and what to do with results.
Exactly. That's, yes.
Okay. And they will have received their own results.
You will have received your personalized results.
And part of what you can do with folks, kind of in a global sense, and I think it's kind of helpful to see what the universe looks like, but also in a particular sense is help them understand those things. Because it's one thing to get a whole bunch of results back that says, you're good at this, you're bad at this, but to actually use that effectively is something I think some individual expertise is helpful with.
Yes, we're going to synthesize and get through all of those technical terms that they give you for describing how amazing you are.
Out of curiosity, do you find that through this tool or other tools, folks who are coming into the JM program are similar or different to folks that are traditional lawyers?
I think they're very, very different. And you all are, well, I might be talking a bit out of school, but you're such an exciting cohort to work with because of the different background and experiences that each of you have and the different places you're going.
So it really does mean that there's some differentiation that can occur kind of once we unpack this stuff.
Yes, and I like the use of the word that can occur.
It will occur.
In traditional JD and legal advising, there isn't so much wiggle room and flexibility, but with you all there really is, so that's exciting.
Great. We haven't seen any more questions, so I think we're going to leave it here. We'll end up a little bit early. I'm going to keep talking for 1 minute to see if anybody else has anything else. But other than this, thank you, Michelle, for taking time.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining me. And thank all of you for joining us for this webinar as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you in the days and weeks and months to come, and for seeing you again here for StrengthsFinder.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks.